Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and I'm here today with author Joseph Sale and Amanda from The Reading and Writing Life, and we are going to be discussing meaning in literature. So let both of you introduce yourselves and tell us about yourselves. Amanda, if you want to go first.
Okay. I am a reader, sometimes writer. That's why the name of my channel is called that. But mostly reader. And I read all kinds of genres, especially over the last year. I have really tried to branch out and read anything at least once. So that's pretty much it. I'm kind of documenting that process of discovering new things on my YouTube channel. So
Awesome. I am a writer predominantly, so the other way around. I also do a lot of editing. And so I run an editing business where I develop kind of up-and-coming writers. And so that leads to a lot of analysis of what makes a story work and what doesn't. And of course, it's not something that is easily empirically defined, but even so, there are very interesting correlations between books that work and perhaps books that don't work. So so the writer, but with editing, and so there's an interest in creation, but also in the kind of processes that surround creation, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I think the topic for today came up because we read "Oh Pain" by Kyle Winkler recently, and this spurred a bunch of conversation about the way different cultures absorb material, and some cultures or some people from certain backgrounds just accept things for what they are, and other cultures, like other people like myself, try and find meaning in everything and try and get in the weeds with everything. So I thought it was a very interesting topic to discuss. So I'm glad both of you are here to talk about it today.
We will solve this age-old riddle.
Let's hope so.
Maybe.
Or maybe that's a little ambitious.
yeah, I think so. So Joseph, what does meaning? One of the points that came up that had, because everyone had their different opinions about it, but the one thing that had me wondering was when Jason from Jason's Weird Reads commented something to the effect of, it's almost like seeing a painting that someone just smears paint on a canvas, and to the artist it means nothing, but to us we'll find a meaning in the painting. I thought that was an interesting. So even as an author or creator, you don't intend to have a meaning, but you can't control what other people pull from it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I definitely agree that as an author, you have to release control of your work. Once you put it out into the world, it doesn't belong to you in some sense anymore. It belongs to other people, and people will see anything and everything in it. But I think one thing that's really important to kind of play devil's advocate to this notion of an artist creating something with no meaning is that every act that we perform may not have conscious meaning, but we have performed that action for a reason, even if it's something deep in our unconscious. So writers who write complete gobbledygook and present it and say, this has no meaning, that is the meaningful act, is the act of anarchy, if it makes sense. So even to say that somebody could create anything and it have no meaning is kind of a bit of a paradox, I think, because why did they then make the thing in the first place? But I absolutely agree that I think work that creators produce can have a host of unintentional meanings, and you read even classics now, we can read them in very different lights, and these are books that have been studied to death, have been read hundreds of millions of times, and yet we can still actually read new meanings in them and see things that clearly the author did not intend. And a really great classical example of this is Dr. Samuel Johnson, the legendary kind of essayist and critic who wrote the first English dictionary. what all the universities in the world combined could not achieve, he did alone. And he said of Paradise Lost by John Milton that Milton was the devil's party and he didn't know it. And so Milton was supposed to be writing this book all about how great God was and about, you know, reinforcing biblical values. But actually, there was clearly a part of Milton that was very in touch with his devil's advocate, his dark side. And so Lucifer is a far more compelling and interesting character than any of the messianic and heroic individuals in the narrative. And so he was the devil's party and didn't know it. Some of the arguments he presented for the opposition were a little bit too strong. So I think that's just a really interesting example of an unintended meaning. But yeah, it's a really great question and a really great topic. And I'm interested to know what you and Amanda think.
Yeah, Amanda, what are your thoughts on meaning? Do you look for meaning when you read or write something? Is there a different approach for you when you write something versus when you're reading something?
There is that I'd never thought about before, but when I'm writing something, it is almost just like if I'm writing short stories specifically, I don't have an outline. Like I have an idea of how I want it to go, and then I just sit down and write it. And I'm not thinking about the deeper meanings of it. That I think if I'm connecting things or trying to draw out more of some kind of feeling, that always seems to happen in the revisions, like I don't know, but in the beginning, it's just everything that I think about it. And then I kind of, I guess, go back and work things in. But for a lot of it, I think when I'm writing, I think more about, and I'm not published. Let me start by saying that. So I just write for fun. But when I'm writing, I think, what is the character feeling right now? And what do I maybe want the reader to be feeling or thinking about, and not, but that doesn't happen at the beginning either. So I don't know, meaning doesn't play a part at all when I'm just sitting down at first to write something down. But when I go back, I think I do try to draw out maybe what it would be or what somebody would think about. And then as a reader, I have a degree in English, first of all. And so when I was in school, in college, university, I had this one class, and there was one student in there, and he was more interested in like finance stuff, but he was in this English class with us, and he decided that he was going to take everything that we read and run it through a financial or economic kind of lens. And it was so weird. I mean, it wasn't really weird, the fact that it worked in everything that we read, like even the classics and contemporary stuff, like no matter what we read, he could find like some kind of economic thing to pull out of it. And I thought, is that what reading is? Like, is that how you analyze works? Is that you're supposed to pick like your thing? Because I was not a big reader. I know I got a degree in English, whatever. I was not a big reader. And I just thought that maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. Like, pick my thing. What lens do I view everything that I read through? And I absolutely hated that. Like, I tried to do that a little bit in college, and I'd be like, well, maybe I like this, and maybe I'm going to look for this. And I was like, I can't do that. But I try to figure out what the author was thinking. I do that the whole time I'm reading. I'm like, oh, well, they're trying to do, and then because of being a writer, I guess, I've read like the story beats and how things should go, and how, in epic stories, they kind of follow this pattern. And it depends on, again, the genre that you're reading. But I just think that I find myself a lot of times going, oh, this is leading up to our giant thing right here where this is going to happen. And so I think I analyze it a little bit like that, but I always want to find out what things mean. And so I'm guessing constantly like, oh, that's probably meaning that she's going to end up doing this. And so I'm constantly throwing out theories the whole time I'm reading, which is why I like being able to read books with other people, so that I can say in chapter 2, like, hey, I think that her dad is the bad guy or whatever, like through the whole thing. And so I don't know if that even answered your question about writing and reading and how it's different, but I think I look for meaning all the time.
I just got to say, Amanda, quickly, that many of the best writers in the world are not were not published in the sense that we mean it today. So, you know, you are a writer, and no matter what, you know, the kind of arbitrary way that we've created this division today, you know, if you're writing for fun, for your personal kind of healing or just enjoyment, like, that's fantastic, and you are a writer. And if other people get pleasure out of your work, whether they're reading it on a free blog or whatever, then that's valuable. So
Thank you.
sorry, it's got to be said. It's got to be said.
Well said. And I do think it's interesting the way especially the way different cultures interpret and whether they look for meaning or not, and where that all comes from. I wondered what both of you thought about that.
I mean, do you want me to kind of
go
come in a little bit? I mean, it's really interesting question, because one of my favorite individuals in history is Carl Jung, and Jung had some really interesting theories, obviously, about the mind, and particularly the collective unconscious, and this idea that there are certain symbols that are transcendent, and so no matter the culture, the symbols actually, and it's this bizarre phenomenon that we can observe, the symbols retain meaning across language, across culture, across time. So one symbol would be the serpent, for example. In almost every religion, culture of the world, the serpent is a symbol of knowledge, right? In the Bible, it is the serpent that is actually winding around the tree of knowledge and first tempts Adam and Eve. And of course, Western civilization is predominantly influenced by the Hebrew and the Greek culture. Those are the kind of two main influences. There's a lot of other hosts of things, and it's all very complicated, but you get what I'm saying. If you look at an ambulance today, it has a caduceus on it. So that's a staff that has twin serpents actually going around it, which was the symbol of the god Mercury, or Hermes, or Thoth. Three different cultures, Roman, Greek, Egyptian, all basically participating in this same symbolic knowledge. Now, of course, that's also partly because certain cultures influenced subsequent cultures and handed down some of this symbolic knowledge. There's an element of that, but fundamentally there are these really strange, it's a strange phenomenon that actually there are these universal symbols. So whilst yes, cultures digress, and it's really interesting to explore those exceptions. So one great exception is that Japan is the only country in the world without a flood myth. For example, every other country in the world actually has a myth that at some point in antiquity, the world was covered in water. And there is actually a lot of scientific evidence now that at some point massive polar ice caps did melt that were over a mile high, and probably did cause tsunamis all over the world. So actually this thing that is discussed in a mythological context probably had some basis in reality. But Japan, of course, is protected by the Russian Caucasus Mountains. So, you know, perhaps the floods couldn't actually get over the mountains and couldn't get that far. I mean, that's just my theory, but it's interesting where there are these digressions. But in a bizarre way, I'm more interested in the agreements where you have these really interesting symbols that seem to transcend their origins. And of course, as a writer, to bring this back to what's useful to the viewer at home, if you are a writer, if you can begin to gain an awareness of these symbols and begin to use them, then your writing takes on what we would call like an archetypal power. And obviously, if all you do is write archetypes, then you are just kind of almost writing like a morality play, you know, that it needs to have the dressings and the context of like a specific time and a place. You don't want it to be too abstract in that sense. But you know, you don't want characters walking around called truth unless you're writing very explicitly, writing like an allegorical poem or something. But which I am guilty of myself. But having just said that, but overall, you know, we can use these symbols to deepen the meaning of our work. So, and the final thing, just to briefly come in on that, is that a lot of occultists would say that, for example, Grant Morrison, who wrote Arkham Asylum and lots of other amazing graphic novels, when he wrote Arkham Asylum, he basically created a draconian grimoire. That book, almost every panel of it is actually kind of laden with Ophidian esoteric meaning. And he knew that people wouldn't consciously understand, like, the majority of readers would not know about draconian theology, but it didn't matter because the symbolism would operate on the unconscious regardless of that fact. So it's kind of like sneaking into someone's mind like a thief in the night. So it's a very powerful thing for a writer to be able to do. And I think we should be moving more towards that and less towards deconstruction of meaning, if that makes sense. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it, Amanda.
Were you muted?
My dog started barking, so I muted it. I think that one of the reason that I commented on the video about this when we were initially talking about meaning is because I watched Steve's video the same day that I watched a video from one of my friends who lives in Japan. And she was talking about the fact that she's getting used to, she said the words, used to Japanese writing, because she feels like you need to take the writing as it is without seeking the deeper knowledge or looking for deeper meaning in it. Just accept it for what it is. Like, that's how it's written. And she was talking about it in a cultural way, like as a non-Japanese person living there, she felt like this was how she was learning about their culture, was that reading books, they didn't look for deeper meaning. They accepted it for what it was. And she thought that then the writing was different because of the same reason. And I just happened to see that video the same day that I saw Steve's. And I was like, that's so interesting that everybody's talking about what does this meaning in literature mean? And does it really go by cultures? Like, I just assumed everybody read a book and tried to figure out what the underlying meaning was in whatever they were reading. But now I learned that that's not a thing. And so I think that is what drew me into the conversation, that there are different ways of reading the same book. Like, we're not even talking about different books. We're talking about, we read the same books and people are like, oh, I think it means this and this. The same thing we were talking about with the paintings. Like, people can look at a painting and say, here's what it means. But I think that comes back to the individual. And you talking about, Joseph, that once a writer puts out what they've written, it's no longer theirs. Like,
yeah.
So I think it all kind of comes back to that. It was just really interesting to me that it seemed to be almost a cultural thing in the way people were looking at books in general, like the way they approached the book.
Do we know if this is over time, or has this been something that's evolved or has been the same different cultures? I don't know if anybody knows the answer.
Well, just connecting to what you were saying there, Amanda, it's a brilliant question, Steve. But there's a book in kind of ancient Chinese antiquity called the Tao Te Ching, and one of the lines of the Tao Te Ching is, the Tao that can be spoken about is not the eternal Tao. And that certainly is, I think, reflective of a philosophy of, as you say, not trying to define things, not trying to explore them, actually just recognizing them for what they are, and not in the West. If you look at like the Western pantheons, like, again, going back to the Greeks, but you look at the Greek deities there, we have vivid descriptions of them, vivid depictions of them. They are, we still kind of refer to them now, even though very few people would actively call themselves a pagan and worship them. But we know what Zeus looks like, and Zeus is influenced in many ways, like the kind of Christian conception of what God might look like. So yeah, absolutely. I think from earliest times, Western civilizations have been very concerned with what does this look like? What is God? We have words like omnipotent, omniscient. We have words to describe God. But of course, all words are actually completely inadequate for something that, if it did exist, would be omnipotent and omniscient. So the contrast of the Tao that actually the real Tao cannot be spoken about, as the Tao Te Ching outlines, versus this is what God is, I think, psychologically very interesting, as a central division between East and West that has been around for millennia, really. But that is obviously not to say that people on an individual basis may have their own views and interpretations, and it's a continuum, clearly, that people can exist anywhere on wherever they're born. But in terms of like the fundamental texts, if you like, that have influenced our cultures, they are very different in their approach, though there are intersection points again.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you're talking about earlier about those universal signs that we as a reader don't even know that we're recognizing them necessarily, but because it is just something that's been ingrained in humanity, then it becomes exactly what the author intended, without us having to have a history lesson about draconian theology.
Yeah.
No, we just know. And I think that
oh no.
Uh-oh.
She was about to make a really profound point.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure was.
Oh, you're back. Sorry, we lost you for the second there, Amanda.
Oh, well, I didn't even say anything else. I didn't know what happened. So sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Jonathan is here. Hello, folks. Just tuning in. Thanks for coming by.
Good to have you with us, Jonathan, on this dark quest to the heart of meaning.
And, it's going back to the symbols. Where do those symbols come from?
Now you've gone and done it. Now you've asked the big question. Well, it depends, I guess, who you ask. I mean, as you know, I'm a man sitting in shadow, surrounded by candlelight. So, I occasionally do resort to kind of occult sources of knowledge. I have a propensity for heresy. So there are some interesting kind of texts that explore the origin points. And again, there are these interesting places where all these different kind of religion systems, magical practices kind of intersect. So one, just to throw something out there, is this concept of the ideal world of ideal forms, or the world of formation. So in Kabbalah, they have this idea that the world is divided into four levels of reality, which correlate to four elements, which correlate to all kinds of things, the four divisions of the human being, like, the ideas, so the intellectual mind, the emotional mind, the spirit, and the body. And then, of course, Plato's world of ideal forms as well, which is, all about that, similar, that there's this place from which things are emanating, and what we inhabit is the end result of that emanation. And in some ways, you might view it as the excrement of that emanation, if you want to be gross about it. But so there's this idea that you can trace that back to the source in order to, and this is why people like Leonardo da Vinci were drawing pictures of helicopters long before helicopters ever existed. This is why knowledge seems to be able to travel in these kind of weird and wacky ways, why these symbols crop up, why in Egypt, the pharaoh Anakhenaten suddenly was like, all the Egyptian gods are a lie. There is only one God, and his symbol is the cross. thousands of years before Christ ever turned up. And there are all these kind of paradoxes. So it's almost like there's this place from which ideas come to us, and certain people who are particularly monomaniacal and but open-minded at the same time, able to embrace those two pillars, can kind of get back to that place and then take these ideas. Now, that's obviously a very occult, mystical, crazy idea, but it's quite interesting. And when we talk about on a more kind of grounded level, creativity and how it works, we have this idea of the muse. So writing is not an act of ego and intellect. It's a transmission of something. We are inspired. To inspire, it literally means to give breath. So to breathe in. So it's kind of like the whole process of creativity is not like what so much kind of postmodern literature is like, I'm thinking about things and now I'm going to write down my thoughts. It's like true story is coming from a different place, and with it are all these mythological associations, these symbols. And just to round off that with a quote from Alan Moore, it's words give the means to meaning, and for those who will listen, the enunciation of truth. And I think that's truth with a capital T in his eyes. So that's just my little Kabbalistic, little occult bit on the subject. But I'm interested again what you guys think.
Yeah, my answer was just going to be, before people wrote things down, everybody had all these stories. That was going to be my thoughts. No, I didn't have anything for how it started. I was thinking the same thing. And I do think, though, there's, like you were talking about, the flood, the fact that there's so much, so many old stories in every culture except Japan that has that in there, that I think that's where a lot of it comes from. The fact that it's all similar. I mean, I guess we don't know exactly how that happened. Clearly, maybe it was based on some kind of fact, but then it's part of what we pass down, I guess, in our general knowledge from person to person. I was thinking the same thing about this because my kids, there was a word somebody said the other day, and I just assumed that they knew this word from being humans in the world. And it wasn't something I had explicitly sat down and said, this is what this means. But and they kind of figured it out based on the context clues around it, but they still didn't know that word. Like, they hadn't heard it. I don't even remember what it was. But so I stopped and I was like, okay, here's what it means. And we talked about it. But I just thought, they're not exposed to as many things just around the world without sitting down and reading them or looking them up. Like, they can live their whole lives just with their little friends on their little devices and not have a ton of outside influence. They don't go to school, so they're not out in a school, and they don't watch a ton of TV, and so they don't see commercials, and they don't see like that kind of thing, which I think commercials influence a lot more than we want to say that they do. And so there's just a lot of things that I feel like they will get once they read.
Robot time.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just thought that was, I don't know if that is changing because the world is becoming smaller since we're all right here together, or if, like, what kind of things are we passing down from for the next group?
It's interesting that they don't know where memory is held in the body. And a lot of really recent research, like, my wife is a clinical psychologist and she works at like a pain clinic. So, a lot of research is now emerging that we hold memories almost in the body, like not in brain. And so if you then think about kind of DNA and genetics, It's like maybe things can actually be passed down at like a biological level. We don't even have to repeat the stories. The stories are contained in our bodies. And when we have children, unfortunately, well, in a good way and in a bad way, we pass on those stories at a kind of DNA level, as well as, you know, any other kind of risks of whatever disease or strengths as well, you know, aptitudes for swimming or for whatever, you know. It's an interesting idea, and I think it holds weight. And then if you think that you are the product of so many people over such a long period of time and all the accumulated narrative, I mean, how can things not have deep meanings? It's kind of the layers of all that existence.
Right, but it's the things that have been important to the people that you come from. So you might not know anything about what happened or what these people come from or whatever. We did a study. This is very interesting because we were in a class where they were discussing the cycle of poverty and how if you don't know where the money's coming from for your next meal, it actually changes your brain composition, where you're focused on what is next and what is next and what is next. And that actually does get passed down to the children who actually have their brains just don't look the same as someone who came from a family or specifically a mother who did not have to wonder, am I going to have food today? Do I have a place to sleep? Like those two things. And because her brain chemicals or her brain makeup had changed, her child then came into the world already with a non-neurotypical brain setup just because of what happened when they were inside her being like all put together. And so the fact that you're talking about that our bodies maybe know the pain or feel the memories before our brains do, that is exactly what has happened to me as I am going through this PTSD journey from this traumatic thing that happened a few years ago. And I never even knew what anxiety was before this happened. I certainly never had panic attacks. Like I didn't know any of that stuff. And then there was this event that happened. And for years afterwards, I didn't know it, but my body was triggering like the same kinds of feelings that happened before the event would start me down a whole thing of memory that I had no idea was even happening. And so I went through this like thing with a therapist to move it from my conscious, like this is happening this moment, into the past where like, but you're not currently living in it, which is what my body kept saying, like, we're doing this again right now. And my brain, even if my brain was saying, no, we're not, everything's fine and we're safe, my body was still like, nope, I remember. And so it would have all the same reactions as the initial thing. And so when you were saying that our bodies hold on to memory, I think that's absolutely true. Like it has taken years of reworking, not just my brain, but my body to be like, nope, I know that's what that feels like. That's not what's happening right now. Like, so it's taken a lot. And I feel like that is interesting research. I'm glad somebody's out there checking it.
Thank you for sharing that story, Amanda. It's you know, a really privilege that you would you know, kind of reveal that and talk about that openly, and it's really important for people to hear. And congrats on doing the hard work and you know, facing it. But yeah, it's amazing now. People, you know, actually doing yoga, officially sponsored yoga by the government. I'm overjoyed because I've always been into weird, wacky stuff and alternative modes of healing and stuff, but and self practice. But you know, to actually see that now becoming more mainstream and people that actually a lot of the science is backing up the 3,000-year-old traditions, and they knew that, you know, parts of the body were correlated to certain things, and the brain and the body were way more interlinked, and you know, so yeah, well, fantastic. I you know, I can't say any more. Your story is the pinnacle. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
It's hard to follow that up.
So let's talk about meaning. And no, I'm just kidding. But I do want to go back because I thought about this before. So if there's something that you're really interested in, like, I don't know, you seem to have a wide range of things that you're interested in, but like the guy that was in my class, I just wonder if people always look at literature from the thing, like whatever is most, because I think what's most interesting to me is the craft and how it is put together. And so I think that's what I pay attention to a lot when I'm reading. And I'm currently going through the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. And I find myself a lot of times just stopping and going, did he know this in book one? Like when he was writing that, did he know he was going to put this in here? And I'm totally outside the story. Like I'm not, at that point, I'm not engaged in what's going on with the characters so much as I just am wondering about the creative process of putting it all together. And so I just wonder if that's how people view writing. I mean, view things that they're reading. Is it from the thing that interests them the most? Is that, does anybody know that answer?
I mean, Steve, do you want to come in on this?
I'll let you handle this one.
I don't want to do all the talking. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think I come back to something you said earlier about how in your initial draft you didn't necessarily consciously know what meaning you were going for. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think work that is too intentional in its meaning, like I'm going to teach people this lesson, like I'm seeing a lot of that at the moment. I'm seeing I have these political values, I am going to write something that reinforces it. And it doesn't matter how much as a reader you might agree with their political values, we all recognize the falsity of a forced message. So I think it's absolutely right and great that you are approaching it as just an outpouring of creativity, and then it's afterwards you think, oh well, there might be something here or there might be something there. And
well, I tried it the other way, and I think I just realized that it's absolute. It seems fake. Like when you write it with a point, even if it's a point you believe in or a moral that you want to get across, if you start with that, then I think, I don't know, at least when I write, it just seems fake. And I'm like, nope, I just need to write a story. And eventually it ends up even getting around to what I wanted to say to begin with, but in a better way, usually.
I think it's like an acknowledgement that the true nature of the universe is so strange that to apply our own kind of morality to it is kind of a falsity. And some of the best works that have moved me deeply are really surprising. You find yourself rooting for characters you shouldn't, but you do, and they teach you something. And sometimes the villains teach us more than the heroes, and that's what a villain's there for. I see a lot now of how dare. I mean, actually, I mentioned Alan Moore, and he's written some profound stuff, but he's also had some really bizarre things of how dare people agree with Rorschach? It's that's what Rorschach is there for. Yes, he's a complete extremist. He's a fanatic. He's a madman, but he's obviously there to show us a side of ourselves that we don't want to see. And looking into that abyss can teach us something. And just to back up your earlier point even more, Amanda, when I wrote Virtue's End, there was a certain scene which I won't spoil because I'd like people to get to experience it organically and for the first time. But there was a certain scene, and after I wrote it, I just started crying uncontrollably. It must have lasted 6 hours genuinely, which sounds ridiculous, but it was a visceral outpouring of emotion. And after. I had no idea why. I didn't understand. I'd written the scene, and the scene was the scene, and I didn't understand why it affected me so deeply. But later, reflecting about it, talking about it with my wife, I realized this was about my father's battle with cancer. And so my unconscious was way ahead of my conscious. I didn't sit down now I'm going to process my trauma of my father's battle with cancer, but in the process of writing, the unconscious started to take over and start to take me to that place. And it used a symbolic language that it knew I would eventually come to understand. It wasn't literal, but it approached it from a symbolic way, and it was more powerful as a result of that.
Hmm.
And so I guess like it's really important to also reinforce that like writing is healing. It's how we process reality, and with that comes a responsibility, I think, to use writing for good, to use it to heal people, to nourish people, to rewrite traumas. And maybe that's my own bias. I can be quite triggered, to be honest, by work that is actively nihilistic. I find it to be kind of pointless in a way. And I know some people really enjoy going to that darkness, and that is a healing experience for them. But for me personally, I like for the narrative to heal me, to rewrite that narrative. So yeah, it's a really big and interesting question, and the topic is now increasingly extending into other areas. But I guess we should embrace that.
What a minute! Oh, I thought you said something.
No, I wasn't.
It is. It takes us places I didn't think it would. This topic, but I think it's really really fascinating the way all of us have a different approach to work. And you know, I didn't really think about it until after I read O'Pain and Kyle Winkler said there is no meaning. There's not there is It's just stories. That there is nothing, because I was looking for things, and I was trying to pick about the stories and find out what he was trying to say or what the story was about or the underlying meaning and everything. It's just trained in my brain to look for that thing, things. And when he said there is no point to it, it's just a story. Just was a
So,
different.
so when he said that to you, did it change the way you felt about the book?
It almost felt like almost like in a freeing way that I could just I can relax almost, that I'm not missing something. Story. I can just enjoy it for what it is. And
So that's what you're worried about, is that you might miss things in the story if you don't ask or dig?
I think so. I didn't really think about this until after that conversation, but I think I do worry about missing things or about not picking up on certain story elements or what does this mean? I'm always looking for meaning, and it wasn't until that experience that I thought, why am I doing this? Why am I torturing myself? I mean, if I find something, that's great, but if I don't, then that's okay too.
It's interesting, like he says that the stories have no meaning, because I wonder whether, because there's so many levels of meaning, right? There's meaning to the author,
Mhm.
meaning like a meaning that the reader interprets into it, and then there's like transcendental meaning, which is the kind of meaning that I've been like interested in and talking about. And so, presumably he doesn't mean that it means nothing to him. Otherwise, why would he have written them? But then again, maybe his interpretation of the word meaning is not as heavy as as mine, and maybe it's more like, it has meaning in the sense that like it allowed him to explore stuff, but it doesn't have like meaning with a capital M. It is really interesting.
Right. Maybe he just meant like there's no deeper meaning other than what is happening in the story, which I mean, I guess I get that from a writer's point of view a little bit, but still, I don't know. For me, everything has multiple layers of meaning. But again, I think that's also because that's what I look for. And so that's in there. But I don't expect the readers, I think, to know that. Like, I don't expect them to be like, oh, well, this is what she meant by this. And then this is the deeper meaning of this thing. And I kind of want it to be enjoyable, which again, that comes back to my experience as a reader. Like you were saying, I don't care if it goes to the dark places, but I need it to end in a hopeful
Yeah.
way. Like I need us to end where we are feeling better or we are headed out of something. Like I don't need it to be, oh, everybody lived and everything is fantastic, but I do need there to be some kind of turn at the end that just is like, well, it's not all is lost. There needs to be some kind of turn for me at the end, but that's just how I am. So that's how I'm going to write a story, because that's the kind of story that I want to read. And I guess that is the good thing about there being so many different genres of writers and readers, that we can all and figure out what we like and what we don't like. And I found out some of the things that I didn't like through the past year by reading things that I never would have picked up before. And so I don't know. I just don't like to say I don't like whatever it is unless I have given it a chance and actually like explored it. Not, well, I heard somebody talk about it and I'm sure that I won't like it. So I try to avoid doing that in all areas, but specifically with readings, that's what we're talking about, is just be open and try new things. And so I like that there are so many genres and even subgenres within those that that move in so many different ways. But I do think that there has to be a meaning. Like, even if you're just saying, well, what the characters are doing, that's the meaning, like that's the plot of the book or whatever. But I don't know how you don't. I would be the same way, Steve. I would be looking for the meaning, but I think I'm looking for the meaning for a different reason. Like, you're not wanting to miss anything. I'm just wanting to find out why they chose to do it the way they did. Like, that's why I want to know the meaning for the writing part of it. So I never thought about that till we had this conversation. So I'm glad I know more about myself. I don't know if anybody else got anything out of this, but I did.
Links to I feel like there's links to kind of whether you whether you're the kind of person who gives credence to dreams, right? Like, loads of people I know are like, oh, dreams are a load of rubbish, they don't mean anything, but the other day I dreamt about this foam like washing over me, and then they just describe something that's so blatantly sexual or so blatantly kind of Freudian that you just go, can you not see how blatantly this does me? Like, your psyche is talking to you. It doesn't, if you're not interested in the kind of metaphysical, magical, whatever, even just a like scientific, psychological level, your brain is talking to you, and the way it's talking to you is in images, like while you're processing your day. And as you say, even if the meaning is as simple as that, like, you had an argument with somebody and then you dream about, having a fight with a big knight or something, and that's it. That's how you process in your dream. You can tell I read too much fantasy, right? My dreams are all knights and forests and woods and stuff, but whatever language speaks to you. So yeah, I think, like, the meaning is to be found kind of everywhere. But I do agree with the idea that we don't always need to pursue it. Sometimes things are beautiful and we don't understand fully why. And sometimes those are the most beautiful things, I guess, where they kind of defy your conventions. I think poetry can be a lot like that. Like, this sentence is beautiful. I don't understand it. I don't understand an empirical meaning to it, but something about the combination of words appeals to me at an aesthetic level, deep level. So
another, not exactly the same kind of example, but when I read books on my Kindle, I constantly am underlining or highlighting things and sentences for that same reason, that I think the word choice is just perfect. Or sometimes I'm like, really, why did you do that? And I'll highlight it. But there are times that I go back when I'm done and I look at all my highlights, and sometimes I'm like, why did I highlight that? Like, in the moment, it really stood out to me for whatever reason. But then weeks later, when I'm finished with the whole book, depending on how long it takes me to finish, I go back and look and I'm like, why did I underline this? And so then it's almost like a dive into what I was thinking about when I started that, like what it means.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting. Like, in a dialogue with yourself almost about like why things resonated at a certain time. I don't know if you ever get that, Steve. Like, I get it a lot with music, actually. Like, I hear a song and I'm like, this is the best song in the universe. It's so good. And then, like, I go back to it maybe a week later and I'm like, why was I so obsessed by this? Like, this just doesn't have the same type of resonance at all.
It could have been, Amanda. It could have been you highlighted it because of the emotions, the feeling you were having during that moment, and you don't have the full context when you go back and you look at a line or two without having the extra, before and after of how you were feeling in that moment. So
yeah, I think so too. It also has the same effect. I've started doing it with my physical books. Like I just have a little pack of those little flag things. And so I've started doing it with physical books, just like sticking a flag in there, and I'll go back. And sometimes, again, I'm like, I mean, like I vaguely remember that I highlighted that for whatever reason, but sometimes I have the opposite where I can go right back to how it felt when I read that. And I think that's why people reread, like those like those rereaders. I was going to say the same thing to Jonathan, by the way, when you were saying that about the music. My children constantly want to know why I liked boy bands in the 90s. And I'm like, just leave me alone and let me have this. I can't explain it to myself even now, but just let my teenage self have the boy band.
We have to celebrate it. There's no shame. I mean, I still rate and listen to Robbie Williams, and I get mocked for it all the time. I mean, I also listen to like super heavy music and classical music and all kinds of weird stuff. And like a lot of people think, yeah, that kind of suits Joe, and then they're like, Robbie Williams, it doesn't add up with your character, with your interests. But there was a certain time in my life, I guess, where he just resonated in some way, and a certain age and going through certain stuff emotionally, and just the combination of earnest pathos and kind of cheeky rascality just kind of worked. And those early associations are really difficult to shake, right? They stay with you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Now it's inside your body and it remembers. So.
yeah.
And you're gonna pass it down to your kids and your grandkids, the boy band, the love for boy bands in the 90s.
No, not my kids. I'm gonna have to work on my grandkids because my kids are fully out. So
maybe that'll get passed on for the future generations. But it's a really interesting discussion about meaning, and I think lots of tangents we can go on, and just ton of just interesting stuff. So I want to thank both of you for coming by to chat about meaning, and it's always a pleasure to talk with both of you. And thanks for everyone who came by to watch. But Amanda, if someone wants to connect with you, where can people find you?
Well, my YouTube channel is where I am the most consistent all the time. And I have an Instagram account that I do at least check once a day. But that's all I'm promising is once a day. I don't like social media in general. I'm not on social media. I mean, I have accounts, but I'm never there. And so my YouTube is where I am multiple times a week, and then Instagram at least once a day. So, and it's all The Reading and Writing Life everywhere. So
I'll put your links down below. And Joseph, where can people find you and connect with you?
I guess I do second your opinion on social media, Amanda, but it is a necessary evil in today's world. So I can be found on Twitter predominantly. My tag is @JosephWordsmith, and you will mainly see links to occult interviews and essays and other strange things on my Twitter feed. But we have some great chats, as you mentioned earlier, Steve. And come join my mind cult, and we can all hang out together and have cool conversations like this.
So I have a question for you. Where do we start with your writing? Where do you recommend that we start?
That is a very, very generous question.
Good question.
I would say probably the best place to start is with Dark Clarity. I think that he looks back to his bookshelf.
I can never find them when I'm looking for them.
They elude you when you want them.
It's here. It's here.
That's okay. I have your author page pulled up on Goodreads, and I was like, I'm just going to write down whatever he says. That's where I'll go. So
Yeah, I've written a few things. I've been a fairly busy boy. I'd say that like a lot of people would say that the Black Gate or Virtue's End is probably like the best thing I've ever done. But those things require, I would say, they require something of the reader. They require you to commit to a journey, and Dark Clarity is possibly something that you could read in isolation and hopefully enjoy. And it's a good introduction, I think, to the madness of Joe Sale. It starts in a very grounded place, which is unusual. Most of my work does not.
Okay, well, that's what I'm doing then. All right.
Well, that's very, very kind of you. I don't think I'm actually subscribed to you, which is a travesty. So I will rectify that immediately.
Well, you can join the whole handful of other people that are over there. So
it starts somewhere. Everyone
that's
starts.
right. That's right. It
Yeah.
does. It's fine.
I remember.
So I don't care.
That is the main thing. I remember when I started my Patreon, it was like I had like 3 people on there, and the other day someone was like, "Oh, how are your 8 people on Patreon?" They're being kind of playfully mocking. I said, "It's 11 now."
That's right.
I'm one of the 11.
He is. He's one of the 11 because he's a legendary and generous man. Yeah,
Let's not get carried away.
Indeed. No, I appreciate everyone who subscribes, but I'm happy to recruit people one by one, and as you say, it's been a really enjoyable experience, and I get a lot back from the people on there, and again, great conversations, great ideas being shared. That's what it's all about. Doesn't matter if there's 11 or 1100, although 1100 would be nice, but but I'm enjoying it with 11. So
It has to start somewhere. So we are doing a regular series. We're going to meet every so often with Joseph, and hopefully Amanda will join us next time when we set a date. But we're going to have different topics for discussion about once every few weeks, once a month, give or take, depending on our schedules, how we can match them up. Since we live a world apart, it's kind of have to get creative sometimes. But thank you again for coming by. It's always a pleasure, and thanks everyone who came by to watch and to interact with us.
thank you for
see
hosting
you guys
us.
next week.
Bye.